The mortar rounds came without warning. 0847 hours on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other. The first explosion tore through the administration building at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, sending a column of black smoke into the California sky. The second hit the parking lot. The third cratered the main training range. Commander Dalton Blackwell hit the dirt behind a concrete barrier as shrapnel whistled overhead. His radio erupted with overlapping voices, panic bleeding through military discipline. Contact, contact multiple hostiles hills to the northeast. Crew-served weapons, I count at least 3 positions. Finch is hit, Finch is down. Blackwell keyed his mic. All stations, this is actual, report casualties and status. The responses came back in fragments. 2 wounded, ammunition depleting, enemy fire intensifying from 3 directions. And the one piece of information that made his blood run cold, quick reaction force, estimated time of arrival 15 minutes. They had maybe 10. Blackwell raised his head just enough to scan the range. His team was scattered across 200 meters of open ground, pinned down by coordinated fire that spoke of military training and careful planning. Petty Officer Garrett Finch, his designated marksman, was slumped against an equipment shed with blood spreading across his shoulder. Chief Lachlan Burke was dragging himself toward cover shrapnel wounds, turning his legs dark with blood. And somewhere in the chaos, a woman was moving. Blackwell caught the movement in his peripheral vision. Low to the ground, tactical, purposeful. While every other civilian on the base was running for shelter, she was crawling toward the equipment shed with the kind of controlled movement that took years to develop. "What the hell?" Blackwell muttered. The woman reached the shed and disappeared inside. 30 seconds later, she emerged with a Mark 11 sniper rifle in her hands, moving toward the observation tower with the fluid efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Blackwell recognized her then, the range maintenance specialist, the quiet one who showed up at 0500 every morning to clean the shooting bays and replace the targets. The one his team had nicknamed Ghost because she was so easy to overlook. Kincaid. Her name was Kincaid, and she was carrying a precision rifle toward an active firefight like she knew exactly what she was doing with it. 14 years earlier, the Montana wind cut like a blade across the high prairie, carrying the scent of sage and distance. Marlo Kincaid was 12 years old and her hands were shaking. "Breathe," her grandfather said. Thaddeus Kincaid stood behind her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. He was 73 years old, but his posture still carried the rigid discipline of the Army Ranger he had been half a century before. The winter sun caught the silver in his crew cut and the deep lines around his eyes carved there by decades of squinting through rifle scopes. "I am breathing," Marlo said. "No, you're gasping. There's a difference." The target was 800 meters downrange, a steel silhouette barely visible against the brown grass. The rifle in Marlo's hands was a Remington 700 chambered in .308, and it felt impossibly heavy. "I can't hold it steady," she said. "You're not supposed to hold it steady. Not completely. That's not how the human body works." Thaddeus knelt beside her, his knees popping. "See that shake in your hands? That's your heartbeat. Your pulse. You can't stop it, so you work with it instead of against it." He reached over and adjusted her grip, moved her elbow a fraction of an inch. "You fire between heartbeats," he said. "In the space where your body goes still for just a moment. That's where the shot lives. In the quiet between the noise." Marlo closed her eyes, felt her pulse in her fingertips, counted the rhythm. Beat, beat, silence, beat. She fired in that silence. 800 meters away, the steel target rang like a bell. "That's my little ghost," Thaddeus said quietly. The nickname stuck. For the next 14 years, through high school and college, and a degree in ballistics engineering, she earned while shooting competitively under an assumed name. Marlo was her grandfather's shadow. Every weekend was spent on this same ridge learning the craft that the Army had taught Thaddeus in a war most people had forgotten. The Korean War. The Frozen Chosen. December 1950, when temperatures dropped to 30 below zero, and the Chinese Army surrounded the 1st Marine Division in the mountains of North Korea. 89 confirmed kills, Thaddeus told her once. "That's what my official record says. But little ghost, I'm going to tell you the truth because someone should know it. The real number was higher, much higher. But some of those shots, the brass didn't want to count them. Because admitting how good I was would have meant admitting how bad things got." He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the mountains. "We held that line for 17 days, he said. 40,000 Chinese against 30,000 Marines and soldiers. Everyone said we'd be slaughtered, and maybe we should have been. But we walked out of those mountains, bloodied, frozen, but we walked out. Because of soldiers like you," Marlo said. "No." Thaddeus shook his head. "Because of soldiers who did their job even when the job was impossible." That's what I'm teaching you, Marlowe. Not how to shoot. Anyone can learn to shoot. I'm teaching you how to do the impossible when everyone says you can't. He died in the spring of 2022, 3 months after Marlowe's seventh rejection from the Navy's sniper training program. His last words to her were delivered from a hospital bed, his voice rough with pneumonia, but his eyes still sharp. They'll never give you a fair shot, little ghost. So don't ask for one. Just be ready when the door cracks open. Because it will, and when it does, you kick it down. The funeral was small, a handful of Rangers from his unit, old men now standing in the Montana wind. The Army sent a color guard and a folded flag. They fired the traditional 3 volleys, and Marlowe stood dry-eyed through all of it, because Thaddeus had taught her that tears were for after the mission was complete. 2 months later, she applied for a job at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado as a range maintenance specialist. Not because it was what she wanted, but because it was close enough to the world she belonged in that she could keep the door in sight, waiting for it to crack open. She had been waiting for 2 years. Present day. Day 742. Marlowe arrived at Coronado at 0500 hours, same as every morning. The base was still dark, the Pacific wind carrying salt and the distant sound of waves against the shore. She parked her truck in the employee lot and walked to the range complex with a travel mug of coffee and a backpack containing the tools of her trade: brooms, scrapers, target repair kits, ammunition inventory sheets, the things that made her invisible. The main shooting range was a sprawling complex of 20 separate bays, each designed for different types of training: pistol, rifle, long-range precision, close quarters, battle. Marlowe knew every inch of it. She knew which lane had the best lighting for spotting impacts at distance. She knew which concrete barriers had developed stress fractures that would need replacement soon. She knew the exact angle of the morning sun that would create glare on the eastern lanes between 0730 and 0815. She knew things that most of the SEALs who trained here would never notice because they didn't have to notice. They were here to shoot. She was here to clean up after them. The distinction was important. The distinction was everything. Marlowe started with Base 7, sweeping up the brass casings that yesterday's training had scattered across the concrete. She worked methodically, the rhythm familiar enough that her mind could drift while her hands stayed busy. The SEALs would arrive in an hour. SEAL Team 5 scheduled for pre-deployment training, advanced urban warfare drills, and precision shooting exercises according to the schedule posted in the range office. They would spend the morning running through close-quarters scenarios and the afternoon on long-range accuracy, and Marlowe would be invisible again, moving between the lanes to replace targets and restock ammunition while they trained for missions she would never be part of. 2 years, 742 days of being a ghost in a place where ghosts weren't supposed to exist. She finished Base 7 and moved to Bay 8, where someone had left a spotting scope on the shooter's bench. Marlowe picked it up, her hands moving automatically through the motions of checking the lenses for damage. The scope was high-end, loopholed probably $4,500 worth of precision optics, left behind like a forgotten water bottle. The carelessness bothered her more than it should have. She secured the scope in the equipment room and continued her rounds. Bay 9, Bay 10, 11. The sun was coming up now, painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and gold. In the distance, she could see the Pacific dark blue and endless. Marlowe paused just for a moment and let herself imagine what it would be like to be here as something other than maintenance staff. To walk onto this range in uniform instead of work coveralls. To have her name on a training roster instead of a custodial schedule. The fantasy lasted exactly 10 seconds before she shoved it down and got back to work. The SEALs arrived at 0700, a convoy of tactical vehicles rolling into the parking lot with the controlled chaos that was their trademark. Marlowe watched from the equipment shed as they geared up their movements, efficient and professional. She recognized most of them by now, had learned their names and ranks even though none of them had bothered to learn hers. Commander Dalton Blackwell, 38 years old, 16 years in special operations with a reputation for tactical brilliance and a command style that was firm but fair. He led from the front, earned respect through competence rather than authority, and treated everyone on his team like they mattered. Everyone except the cleaning staff. Petty Officer Garrett Finch, 42, the team's designated marksman with 18 years of experience and eyes that were starting to betray him. Marlowe had watched him struggle with long-range shots, lately missing targets he should have hit easily. He blamed the wind or the equipment, but Marlowe knew the truth. His vision was declining, and he was too proud to admit it. Chief Lachlan Burke, 39, communications specialist, Irish-American, with a sharp sense of humor and a deeper understanding of tactical radio operations than anyone Marlowe had ever encountered. He was the one who kept the team connected, the invisible thread that turned individuals into a unit. Lieutenant Wade Holloway, 35 demolitions expert with a wife and 3 kids in Virginia Beach, and a tendency to carry photos of them everywhere. He talked about retirement, sometimes about getting out before his luck ran out. But he kept re-enlisting because he was good at what he did and the teams needed good people. They were warriors, professionals. The kind of men who ran toward danger when everyone else was running away. And they had no idea that the woman cleaning their shooting lanes could outshoot most of them. Marlowe stayed in the shed while they began their drills. She had learned early on that her presence during training was tolerated but not welcomed. So she worked on equipment, maintenance, calibrating target systems, and organizing ammunition, while the sound of gunfire echoed across the range. At 0930, she heard the rhythm of fire change. Someone was missing shots. Multiple misses from the sound of it. Marlowe set down the rifle cleaning kit she had been inventorying and moved to the window. Finch was at lane 12, firing at targets 700 meters downrange. She watched him take 5 shots. 4 of them missed completely. The problem was obvious. He wasn't reading the mirage. The heat shimmer rising from the ground between the firing line and the target was creating a visual distortion that made accurate wind calls nearly impossible without proper technique. But Finch was trying to shoot through it instead of reading it, and the result was a pattern of misses that drifted consistently left. Marlowe watched for another minute, then pulled out a notebook from her backpack. The notebook was worn, the pages filled with 2 years of observations written in tight, precise handwriting. Technical notes on shooting technique, equipment maintenance recommendations, tactical observations that no one had asked for and no one would read. She flipped to a blank page and started writing. Subject: mirage reading, technique for precision shooting. The thermal shimmer visible at mid-morning creates optical distortion between 400 to 800 meters. Standard technique attempts to shoot through this distortion, resulting in horizontal drift of 0.3 to 0.7 MOA depending on temperature differential. Alternative approach: use mirage as wind indicator rather than obstacle. The shimmer pattern reveals wind direction and approximate velocity with greater accuracy than flags or vegetation. When mirage boils straight up, wind is negligible. When mirage drifts horizontally, wind velocity can be calculated by drift angle. Recommended implementation: train shooters to adjust elevation. Focus on spotting scope to place optical plane at mid-distance. This maximizes mirage visibility while maintaining target clarity sufficient for shot placement. She continued for 2 pages detailing the specific techniques her grandfather had taught her for reading atmospheric conditions. When she finished, she folded the pages and placed them in an envelope marked only with Range Training Memo number 23. At lunch, while the team was away from the range, Marlowe slipped into the command office and left the envelope on Commander Blackwell's desk. She had done this 18 times before over the past 2 years. Anonymous technical memos covering everything from rifle maintenance to ballistic calculations. None of them were signed. None of them identified her as the author. Most of them had been implemented into the team's training protocols. Marlowe had watched her recommendations become standard practice, watched the SEALs improve their accuracy and efficiency using techniques she had provided. And she had watched Commander Blackwell credit those improvements to consultation with outside experts in his after-action reports. The invisibility burned, but it was better than nothing. The afternoon proceeded according to schedule. The SEALs ran their drills. Marlowe maintained the range. The sun tracked across the sky, and the Pacific wind picked up, bringing the smell of salt and kelp. At 1500 hours, Marlowe returned to the equipment shed to complete her daily inventory. The shed was climate-controlled, lined with racks of rifles and ammunition storage. Her workspace was a metal desk in the corner, surrounded by cleaning supplies and maintenance logs. And taped to the wall above the desk, hidden behind a calendar, was a stack of letters that represented 2 years of rejection. Marlowe pulled them out now, even though she had them memorized. 7 applications to the Navy's sniper training program. 7 rejections. The first 3 had been form letters. Standard bureaucratic language thanking her for her interest and explaining that she did not meet the current qualification standards. The 4th had been more specific. Her shooting scores were noted as exceptional, but concerns were raised about her physical readiness for the demands of the program. The 5th rejection mentioned that the program was currently at capacity and unable to accept additional candidates at this time. The 6th suggested that she might be better suited to other military occupational specialties that would utilize her technical skills. The 7th rejection was different. It was still a form letter signed by a Captain Vance from the Naval Special Warfare Command. But tucked inside on a separate piece of paper with no official letterhead was a handwritten note. "You're qualified, but they'll never admit it. Stop trying." Marlowe had stared at that note for hours when it arrived 6 months ago. Tried to figure out if it was meant to be cruel or kind. Tried to understand why a female officer would tell another woman to give up. Eventually, she had taped it to the wall alongside the rejection letters, a reminder that some doors stayed closed no matter how hard you knocked. She was folding the letters back into their hiding place when her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, probably spam. But when she opened it, the message made her breath catch. Your grandfather's classified service record has been declassified under the 50-year rule. Files available for review at National Archives, College Park, Maryland. Reference number K 501953 KINC AIDT. Marlowe read the message 3 times. Thaddeus had died with stories he never told, operations that were still classified when he passed. She had tried to access his full service record before, but everything beyond his basic DD-214 had been sealed. Until now. She grabbed her laptop and pulled up the National Archives database, entered the reference number, waited while the system processed her request. The file was massive. 217 pages of declassified documents, ranging from after-action reports to intelligence summaries to personal correspondence. Marlowe downloaded it all, her hands shaking slightly as she opened the first file. Most of it was familiar. Combat records from the Chosin Reservoir, commendations, casualty reports, the official documentation of a war that had killed 36,000 Americans and left the peninsula divided. But on page 93, Marlowe found something she had never seen before. A personnel file for a British Army sniper attached to the 1st Marine Division in November 1950. A woman, 24 years old, assigned to Thaddeus's platoon as part of a Commonwealth observer program that was quietly testing whether female snipers could operate in combat conditions. Her name was Lieutenant Catherine Moore. According to the file, she had been trained by the British Special Operations Executive during World War II and had volunteered for combat duty in Korea against the advice of her commanding officers. Thaddeus had trained her, refined her technique, worked with her for 6 weeks before the Chinese offensive began. The file included her combat record, 34 confirmed kills in 17 days of fighting. Precise, deadly, professional. And then on December 6, 1950, she was killed by Chinese artillery while covering the evacuation of wounded Marines. The final entry in her file was a handwritten note from Thaddeus. Lieutenant Moore was the finest sniper I ever served with. Her gender was irrelevant. Her skill was extraordinary. She died doing her duty, and the Marines she saved will never know her name because this program will be buried alongside her. That is a goddamn shame. We had a weapon the enemy didn't account for, and we threw it away because of politics and prejudice. History will repeat this mistake. I just hope I'm not alive to see it. Marlowe sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. Women had always been good enough. The military had just erased them from history, and her grandfather had known, had carried that knowledge for 73 years, had trained her with the understanding that she would face the same institutional blindness that had gotten Catherine Moore written out of the official record. The anger that rose in Marlowe's chest was cold and sharp and familiar. She had felt it with every rejection letter, with every anonymous memo that got credited to someone else, with every morning spent cleaning the shooting lanes while the SEALs trained for missions she was qualified to undertake. But beneath the anger was something else, something that felt like purpose. Thaddeus had said the door would crack open. He hadn't said when, hadn't promised it would be soon. He had just told her to be ready. Marlowe closed the laptop and checked the time. 1640 hours. The SEALs would be finishing their afternoon session soon. She needed to complete the range maintenance before they departed. She was halfway across the complex when she noticed the truck. A delivery vehicle parked near the perimeter fence, maybe 200 meters from the main training area. That wasn't unusual by itself. The base received shipments constantly. But something about this truck bothered her. The driver was still inside, hadn't moved to make a delivery, was just sitting there, engine idling, watching the range. Marlowe changed course and headed toward the security checkpoint. Found the guard on duty, a young Marine corporal who was barely old enough to shave. There's a delivery truck by the east fence, Marlowe said. Has it been cleared? The corporal glanced at his log. Vendor vehicle. Came in at 1600. They're scheduled for a pickup at the supply depot. Have you verified that? Ma'am, I checked their credentials when they entered. Everything was in order. Marlowe looked back at the truck. The driver was watching the range through his side mirror, not watching the road, not looking at his phone, watching the SEALs. How long has he been parked there, she asked. I don't know, maybe 10 minutes. That's a long time to sit in a truck. The corporal's expression shifted from polite to annoyed. "Ma'am, with respect, I've got protocols to follow. The vehicle was cleared by the gate. If you have a specific concern—" "I do. That truck shouldn't be parked there. I'll make a note of it." But Marlowe could see he wasn't going to do anything. To him, she was just the cleaning lady. And cleaning ladies didn't understand security protocols. She walked back toward the range, that cold feeling in her gut getting stronger. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe the driver was just taking a break. Maybe she was being paranoid. But her grandfather's voice was in her head, repeating one of the lessons he had drilled into her over 1,000 training sessions. Trust your instincts, little ghost. The moment something feels wrong, it probably is. And the moment you ignore that feeling, that's when people die. Marlowe was 50 meters from the equipment shed when the first mortar round hit the administration building. The explosion was massive, a column of fire and smoke that rose into the sky like a fist. Marlowe hit the ground on instinct, her hands over her head, as debris rained down across the complex. The second explosion hit the parking lot. The third cratered the main range. And somewhere in the chaos, her 2 years of waiting came to an abrupt and violent end. The door hadn't cracked open. It had been blown off its hinges. The world became noise and fire and flying concrete. Marlowe stayed flat against the ground as the third mortar round detonated somewhere behind her, close enough that she felt the shockwave punch through her chest. Her ears rang. Dust and smoke filled the air, turning the morning into twilight. Training overrode panic. The training her grandfather had beaten into her through 1,000 repetitions until it became reflex instead of thought. She raised her head, carefully scanning for threats. The administration building was burning. The parking lot was cratered. And across the range complex, she could see muzzle flashes winking from 3 different positions. The hills to the northeast, the tree line to the west. Somewhere near the perimeter fence where that delivery truck had been parked. Coordinated fire, overlapping fields, professional setup. This wasn't random. This was planned. Marlowe's radio crackled to life. She had clipped it to her belt that morning out of habit, even though maintenance staff weren't technically part of the tactical net. Now she was grateful for the habit as Commander Blackwell's voice cut through the chaos. "All stations, this is actual. Report casualties and status." The responses came back fragmented and urgent. Finch hit shoulder wound. Burke down with shrapnel in both legs. Lieutenant Holloway pinned behind a vehicle with half the team taking accurate fire from elevated positions. Ammunition depleting. No clear route to better cover. And then the words that made Marlowe's blood run cold. "CARF is rolling, but ETA is 15 minutes. Say again, 15 minutes." 15 minutes was an eternity in a firefight. Marlowe pushed herself to her feet and ran in a crouch toward the equipment shed. A burst of automatic fire kicked up concrete dust to her left. She didn't look at it. Looking at incoming fire was how you got killed. You moved and you trusted that the angles were wrong and the shooters were rushed. She covered the 200 meters in 40 seconds that felt like hours. The equipment shed door was locked, the electronic keypad blinking red. Marlowe punched in her access code with shaking fingers. Nothing. She tried again. Same result. The security lockdown had engaged when the first explosion hit. Standard protocol. Seal all weapons storage until the all-clear was given. It was smart policy designed to prevent enemies from accessing base armories during an attack. It was also going to get people killed. Marlowe pulled out her phone. Her hands were steadier now, adrenaline sharpening instead of scattering her focus. She opened the utility app she had installed 6 months ago, the one that gave maintenance staff remote access to building systems for troubleshooting. The app wasn't designed for this. Wasn't meant to bypass security protocols. But Marlowe had a degree in engineering and 2 years of studying every system on this base during the long hours when she had nothing better to do than learn how things worked. She navigated through 3 layers of menus while gunfire cracked and echoed around her. Found the building management system. Located the shed's electronic lock. The override required an 8-digit authorization code that she didn't have. But the system had a maintenance backdoor, a diagnostic mode that Marlowe had discovered during a routine inspection. It required a specific sequence of commands entered within a 10-second window, and if you got it wrong, the system would lock you out completely. Marlowe's grandfather had told her once about a shot he made in Korea. A Chinese officer at 900 meters in a snowstorm with wind gusting to 30 miles per hour. Thaddeus had 1 bullet left and 10 seconds to take the shot before the officer disappeared into cover. "Some moments," he had said, "you don't get a second chance, so you don't miss." Marlowe entered the diagnostic sequence. Her fingers moved across the screen with the same precision she brought to a trigger pull. Steady, certain, no hesitation. The lock blinked green. The door opened. Inside the shed, the rifles were racked in precise rows. M4 carbines, shotguns. And in the corner, the precision weapons. The Mark 11 sniper rifle that Finch had been using during morning training, still marked out to him on the equipment log. Marlowe grabbed it along with a spotting scope and 4 spare magazines. The rifle was already zeroed to Finch's preferences, which meant it wouldn't be perfect for her, but it would be close enough. She slung the weapon across her back and moved to the door. That's when she saw the enemy. 3 men moving in tactical formation across the range. They were 200 meters out and closing on the position where Blackwell's team was pinned down. They moved with confidence, weapons up, covering each other's movement. They didn't see Marlowe. She was just another figure in the smoke and chaos. Just a woman in work coveralls standing in a doorway. Invisible. The irony would have been funny if people weren't dying. Marlowe keyed her radio. "Commander Blackwell, this is Kincaid." Static. Then Blackwell's voice tight with stress. "Kincaid, if you're still on base, you need to evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. Sir, I have eyes on 3 hostiles approaching your position from the south. 200 meters and closing." A pause. "Say again." "Mianem." 3 enemy combatants moving in formation approximately 6 minutes from your location at their current pace. They're using the smoke for concealment. Another pause, longer this time. When Blackwell spoke it again, his voice had shifted from dismissive to focused. "Kincaid, where are you right now?" "Equipment shed. I have Finch's Mark 11. "You have what?" Marlowe didn't repeat herself. She was already moving, running in a low crouch toward the observation tower at the northwest corner of the range. The tower was 40 feet tall, designed to give range officers an elevated view of all 20 shooting bays. It would give her height and angle on the enemy positions. It would also make her a target the moment she started shooting. The tower's ladder was exposed steel 40 rungs straight up with no cover. Marlowe slung the rifle across her back and started climbing. Her hands found the rungs automatically, the muscle memory of 2 years of maintenance work taking over. She had climbed this tower 100 times to change light bulbs and adjust cameras. Never while people were shooting at her. Bullets sparked off the tower's frame when she was 20 feet up. Someone had spotted her. The rounds were close enough that she could hear them crack past supersonic, close enough that she could smell the copper tang of hot metal. Marlowe kept climbing, in her head her grandfather's voice, steady and calm and completely without fear. "Fear is fine, little ghost. Fear keeps you sharp, but you can't let it make decisions for you. Fear says stop climbing. Training says keep moving. You listen to training." She reached the platform and rolled over the edge, staying low. The observation deck was 10 feet by 10 feet with a waist-high railing and nothing else. No cover, no concealment, just exposure and altitude. Marlowe unslung the Mark 11 and set up in the prone position, the rifle's bipod legs extended. The spotting scope went to her left side. She worked quickly, but without rushing, each movement deliberate. Her radio crackled. "Kincaid, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Blackwell's voice. He could see her now. Probably thought she had lost her mind. Maybe she had. "Providing overwatch, sir," Marlowe said. "You're not qualified, Commander. Your designated marksman is wounded. Your team is pinned down. And I have elevation on every enemy position currently engaging your people." She paused. "With respect, sir, you don't have time to argue about my qualifications." Silence on the radio. Marlowe used it to scan through the scope, identifying targets. She counted 6 enemy positions. 2 snipers on the hills, a machine gun team in the tree line, 3 riflemen advancing on Blackwell's position. The range to the nearest sniper was 620 meters. The farthest was just over 800, well within her capability, assuming she could make the shots while her hands were shaking and her heart was trying to punch through her ribcage. Marlowe took a breath, let it out slowly, felt her pulse settle into a rhythm she could work with. Blackwell's voice came back on the radio, tight and controlled. "1 shot, Kincaid. You make 1 shot and we'll see. You miss, you get off that tower and you find shelter." "Understood." "Understood, sir." "Burke, give her our tactical frequency." Chief Burke's voice strained with pain. "Switching you to TAC Channel 2, call sign is Overwatch." Marlowe adjusted her radio. A new voice came through, calm and professional. Blackwell had switched to the command net. "Overwatch, this is actual. Target priority is the sniper at your 2 o'clock position range, approximately 600 meters. He's been keeping us pinned for the last 8 minutes." Marlowe swung the rifle right and found the target through her scope. The enemy sniper was set up on a small hill, partially concealed behind a cluster of rocks. Professional position, good cover, limited exposure. He was also backlit by the morning sun, which meant his heat signature was creating a mirage shimmer that would make the wind call easier. Small favors. Marlowe settled into the fundamentals. Stock tight to her shoulder, cheek weld consistent, breathing controlled. She put the crosshairs on target and started her calculations. 620 meters. Wind from the west at approximately 12 miles per hour. Temperature 72 degrees. Humidity moderate. Shooting uphill at about 15 degrees of angle. The ballistic math flowed through her head like water. Years of practice had turned the calculations into something close to instinct. She didn't think through the numbers anymore. She felt them. Marlowe adjusted her scope's elevation, added half a minute of angle for the wind, settled the crosshairs on the center mass of a target who had no idea she was about to kill him. Her finger found the trigger. 2 pounds of pressure on a 6-pound pull. And then she stopped, because she had never shot at a human being before. All those years of training, all those thousands of rounds downrange, steel targets and paper silhouettes and competitions, where she shot under a different name so nobody would connect her to her grandfather's legacy. But she had never put crosshairs on a living person and pulled the trigger. Thaddeus had killed 89 men in Korea, probably more. He had done it because that was the job, and the job had to be done. And he had taught Marlowe everything he knew because he believed she might need those skills someday. This was that someday. 600 meters away, the enemy sniper shifted position. Through the scope, Marlowe could see him working his bolt action, chambering another round. Could see him settle back into his shooting position. Could see him aim at the concrete barrier where Blackwell was taking cover. The choice became very simple. Marlowe found the space between her heartbeats, found the quiet place where the shot lived, and she took it. The Mark 11 recoiled against her shoulder. The suppressor muted the report to a sharp crack instead of a thunderous boom. Through the scope, Marlowe watched the bullet's trace, saw the moment of impact. The enemy sniper dropped. 1 second he was there, the next he wasn't. The radio was silent for a 3 count that felt like an hour. Then Burke's voice, quiet with something that might have been awe. Confirmed kill. Target down. Blackwell came on next. Overwatch, outstanding shooting. Target priority is now the machine gun position, treeline west range 740 meters. They're suppressing half my team. Marlowe was already swinging the rifle left. Her hands were steadier now. The first shot had burned through the uncertainty, left her with nothing but focus and purpose. She found the machine gun team through the scope. 2 men, one firing while the other fed ammunition. They had good cover behind a fallen tree, but they were exposed from her elevated angle. 740 meters. Wind still 12 miles per hour, but now quartering from her right. Downhill shot this time, which meant she needed to reduce her elevation slightly to compensate for gravity. The calculations came faster now. Marlowe adjusted her scope and found her target, the gunner. Take him out, and the assistant gunner would need precious seconds to take over the weapon. She controlled her breathing, found the rhythm, fired. The bullet took the machine gunner in the upper chest. He collapsed backward, and the weapon went silent. Confirmed, Burke said. Machine gun neutralized. Marlowe was already tracking to her next target when something hit the observation tower's railing 6 inches from her head. The impact was sharp and loud, sending sparks and fragments of metal into the air. Someone had spotted her position. Someone was shooting back. Marlowe rolled left, staying low. Another bullet struck where she had just been punching a hole through the tower's decking, and then a third round hit her scope. The optic exploded. Glass and metal fragments scattered across the platform. Marlowe jerked her head back reflexively, felt something hot slice across her cheek. When she looked down at the rifle, the scope was destroyed. Shattered glass, bent housing, completely unusable. Overwatch, you all right? Blackwell's voice was tight with concern. Marlowe wiped blood from her cheek and assessed the damage. The rifle itself was intact. The iron sights were still functional. But engaging targets at 6, 7, 800 meters with iron sights was something that existed in the realm of theoretical possibility rather than practical application. Unless you had spent 14 years training with a grandfather who believed that technology was a convenience, but iron sights were eternal. Scopes destroyed, Marlowe said, switching to irons. Negative Overwatch. Get off that tower. You've done enough. Marlowe ignored him. She was already identifying her next target. The enemy sniper on the far hill, the one who had just put 3 rounds into her position. 800 meters, maybe 810, with iron sights. The radio crackled again. Kincaid, that's an order. Stand down and... A new voice cut in, Garrett Finch breathing hard through pain. Commander, let her take the shot. Finch, you're wounded. Your judgment? Sir, whoever wrote those technical memos that fixed our wind calls last month, that was her. Had to be. I've been watching her for 6 months. She knows things we don't. Finch coughed and Marlowe could hear the pain in it. And right now, she's all we got. Silence on the radio. Then Blackwell's voice resigned and determined at once. Overwatch, you have the shot. But if you miss, I won't miss, sir. Marlowe settled back into position. The iron sights on the Mark 11 were simple. A front post and a rear aperture. Basic and functional and utterly inadequate for precision shooting at extreme range. Except that Marlowe had been shooting with iron sights since she was 12 years old. Had spent hundreds of hours on the Montana prairie learning to read wind and distance and atmospheric conditions without the crutch of magnified optics. Thaddeus had made her do it because he said glass could break and batteries could die, but your eyes would work until the moment you stopped breathing. 800 meters. The target was barely visible without magnification. Just a dark shape against brown earth. Marlowe used the spotting scope with her left eye to identify the precise location, then memorized the sight picture. The wind had shifted, now coming from the southwest at maybe 14 miles per hour. Temperature rising as the morning wore on, which would reduce air density and let the bullet fly slightly flatter. She couldn't calculate it precisely, not without a ballistic computer. So she did it the way Thaddeus had taught her. She felt it. The iron sights settled on a point in space that looked wrong, felt right. Marlowe held there absolutely still, waiting for her body to find its natural pause between heartbeats. The pause came. She fired. 810 meters away, the enemy sniper dropped. The radio exploded with voices. No fucking way! Did she just confirmed kill 800 plus meters iron sights? Who the hell is this woman? Blackwell's voice cut through the chatter. Overwatch. I don't know how you did that, but we need you to keep doing it. I'm seeing movement from multiple positions. Engage targets at your discretion. Marlowe was already tracking. The enemy was reacting now, trying to reposition in response to the threat they hadn't anticipated. It made them visible, made them vulnerable. She found target number 4, a man running between cover positions carrying what looked like a mortar tube. 685 meters moving left to right. Leading a moving target with iron sights required shooting where the target was going to be, not where they were. It was instinct and experience, and a little bit of faith that the ballistic gods were paying attention. Marlowe led the runner by 2 body lengths. Fired. The bullet caught him mid-stride. He went down and didn't move. Target 5 was harder, a squad leader coordinating movement from behind a concrete wall. Only his head and shoulders were visible, and only intermittently. 590 meters. Marlowe waited. Patience was half of sniping. The other half was not missing when patience paid off. The target leaned out to check his team's position. 3 seconds of exposure. Marlowe used a technique Thaddeus had taught her from his Korea days. A ricochet shot. She aimed not at the target, but at the concrete wall beside him, calculating the angle so the bullet would skip off the hard surface and hit him from the side. It was a trick shot, the kind of thing that worked in training maybe 1 time in 5. This time it worked. The bullet sparked off the concrete and took the squad leader in the neck. He dropped and the enemy formation started to collapse. Target 6 was the last sniper, 710 meters prone position, well camouflaged. Marlowe found him through a combination of the spotting scope and pure tactical intuition. He was exactly where she would have set up if the positions were reversed. Good cover, good elevation, good field of fire. She put the iron sights on his position and waited. Snipers were patient, but they also had to shoot eventually. And when they shot, they exposed themselves. 30 seconds passed. A minute. The enemy sniper fired at Blackwell's position. The muzzle flash was brief but unmistakable. Marlowe fired half a second later. Through the spotting scope, she saw the target collapse. 6 targets, 6 kills, 18 minutes from the first shot to the last. The radio traffic had gone quiet. Marlowe scanned for additional threats, but the enemy was pulling back. She could see them retreating toward the perimeter, moving fast and staying low. Overwatch, this is actual. Blackwell's voice was different now. Steady, but with an undertone of something that might have been respect. I'm showing enemy forces withdrawing to the northeast. QRF is 1 minute out. You can stand down. Marlowe safed the rifle and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline crash hitting hard. She looked down at her palms and saw blood. At some point during the engagement, she had gripped the rifle hard enough to split her skin open. She hadn't noticed. Below, she could see the SEALs emerging from cover. Could see medics running toward the wounded. Could see the quick reaction force vehicles rolling through the gate. And she could see Commander Blackwell looking up at the tower where she stood. Even from 40 feet away, she could read his expression. It was the look of a man who had just discovered something that shouldn't exist. Marlowe climbed down from the tower on legs that wanted to fold beneath her. Each rung of the ladder required focus and effort. By the time she reached the ground, her entire body was trembling. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in her hands. Blackwell was waiting for her at the base of the tower. Up close, she could see the concrete dust in his hair, the blood on his tactical vest that might have been his or might have been someone else's. His eyes were hard and measuring. "Kincaid," he said quietly. Marlowe handed him the rifle. "Mark 11, serial number 47823. Scope is destroyed. I'll file the damage report." "To hell with the damage report." Blackwell took the rifle but didn't look at it. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" The question hung in the air between them. 2 years of invisibility, 2 years of being overlooked and underestimated and dismissed. All of it compressed into this single moment where she had a choice. She could tell him the truth, could explain about her grandfather and 14 years of training and 7 rejection letters and the technical memo she had been writing anonymously for the past 2 years. Or she could stay invisible. Marlowe looked past Blackwell to where medics were loading Garrett Finch onto a stretcher. Saw Burke being treated for shrapnel wounds. Saw the body bags being brought out for the casualties they hadn't been able to save. Lieutenant Wade Holloway. She had watched him show photos of his kids just yesterday. Had listened to him talk about retirement and getting out before his luck ran out. His luck had run out. Marlowe met Blackwell's eyes. "My grandfather was Thaddeus Kincaid. Army Rangers, Korean War. 89 confirmed kills. He trained me from the time I was 12 years old." Blackwell's expression shifted. "Wraith Kincaid, he's a legend. Was a legend. He died 2 years ago. And you've been working here as range maintenance the whole time." "Yes, sir." "Why didn't you ever say something?" The laugh that escaped Marlowe's throat was bitter and exhausted. "I did say something, Commander. I applied to the sniper program 7 times. Every application was rejected." Blackwell was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the organized chaos of post-combat operations continued. Casualties being evacuated, perimeter being secured, evidence being collected. Finally, Blackwell spoke again. "Those technical memos, the ones about wind reading and mirage interpretation. That was you." "Yes, sir. We've been using your recommendations for 8 months. They improved our qualification scores by 30%. He paused. "I credited them to outside consultants in my reports." "I know." Blackwell looked like he wanted to say something else. Wanted to apologize or explain or justify. But before he could, Burke called out from the medical station. "Commander, we need you over here." Blackwell looked torn. Then he turned back to Marlowe. "This conversation isn't over. Don't go anywhere." He walked toward the medical station, leaving Marlowe standing alone with the weight of 6 kills settling into her bones. She had done it, had proven herself in the most final way possible, had demonstrated capabilities that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. And all it had cost was the lives of 6 men she had never met and the life of 1 lieutenant who would never see his kids again. Marlowe sat down on the tower's bottom rung. Her hands were still shaking, would probably shake for hours. In her head, her grandfather's voice. "You did your job, little ghost. Some people lived because you were ready when the moment came. That's all a warrior can ask for." But Thaddeus had never told her about this part. The part where success tasted like copper and smoke. Where proving yourself meant adding names to the list of people you had killed. The QRF commander approached her, a Navy captain with salt and pepper hair and enough ribbons on his chest to indicate 30 years of service. "You're Kincaid." "Yes, sir." "Captain Morrison, Naval Special Warfare Command. I need you to come with me. There's going to be a debriefing, and you're a material witness." Marlowe stood. The world tilted slightly. Exhaustion and adrenaline crash making her dizzy. "What about my duties here, sir? The range needs to be..." "The range is a crime scene now, and you're not range maintenance anymore." Morrison's expression was unreadable. "One way or another, after what happened here today, your job just changed." Marlowe looked back at the observation tower, at the range complex she had cleaned and maintained for 2 years, at the place where she had been invisible for so long that invisibility had become almost comfortable. That comfort was gone now. The door her grandfather had promised would open hadn't just cracked. It had been blown apart by mortar fire and 6 precision shots that she could never take back. She followed Captain Morrison toward the waiting vehicles, leaving behind the shell casings and the blood and the last traces of the woman she had been that morning. Ghost was dead. What came next, Marlowe didn't know. but she knew with absolute certainty that there was no going back. The debriefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command was deliberately austere. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, a conference table that had witnessed 1,000 after-action reports and would witness 1,000 more. No windows, no distractions, just the hard business of understanding how 17 enemy combatants had penetrated a secure military installation and why only 3 had left alive. Marlowe sat at one end of the table with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched going cold in front of her. She had been here for 6 hours. 6 hours of questions asked 3 different ways by 3 different people trying to reconcile the official record with what had actually happened. The official record said she was range maintenance, a civilian employee with a degree in engineering and an unremarkable personnel file. What had actually happened was that she had killed 6 enemy combatants in 18 minutes with a precision that professional snipers trained for years to achieve. The disconnect was causing problems. Captain Morrison sat across from her, reading through a tablet with the focused intensity of someone looking for answers that weren't there. Next to him was a Navy JAG officer whose nameplate read Commander Hayes, and whose expression suggested she had seen everything and believed nothing. "Let's go through it again," Morrison said without looking up. "The electronic lock on the equipment shed. You bypassed it how?" "Maintenance diagnostic mode," Marlowe said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were wrapped around the coffee cup to keep them from shaking. "The system has a back door for troubleshooting. I accessed it through the building management app. That's a security vulnerability." "Yes, sir." "You reported this vulnerability when you discovered it." Marlowe met his eyes. "I submitted a memo about it 14 months ago. Facilities management said they would address it in the next system upgrade." Morrison made a note. Hayes leaned forward, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp. "The shots you made from the observation tower," Hayes said. "Can you walk us through your target selection process?" "Commander Blackwell designated the first target. After that, I prioritized based on threat assessment. Enemy snipers first, then crew-served weapons, then command and control. And when your scope was destroyed, you continued engaging targets using iron sights." "Yes, ma'am." "At ranges exceeding 800 meters." "Yes, ma'am." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "Ms. Kincaid, I've reviewed your personnel file. There's nothing in it that indicates advanced marksmanship training. No military service, no competitive shooting background. How do you explain your performance?" This was the 3rd time they had asked the question. The 3rd time they had tried to find inconsistency in her answer. "My grandfather was Thaddeus Kincaid," Marlowe said. "Army Rangers, Korean War. He trained me from age 12 until his death 2 years ago." "Why isn't this training documented anywhere?" "Because it wasn't official, ma'am. It was a grandfather teaching his granddaughter to shoot." Morrison looked up from his tablet. "Wraith Kincaid was your grandfather?" "Yes, sir." "And you never thought to mention this when you applied for employment here?" Marlowe felt something cold settle in her chest. "Sir, I applied to the Navy's sniper training program 7 times over the past 3 years. My qualifications were documented in those applications, including my background and training history." Morrison and Hayes exchanged a look that Marlowe couldn't quite read. "Those applications were rejected," Hayes said carefully. "Yes, ma'am, all 7 of them." The debriefing continued for another hour before they finally released her. Morrison escorted her to the door, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Kincaid, you're not under investigation, but there will be follow-up questions. Don't leave the San Diego area without notifying this office." "Understood, sir." The Navy had put her up in base housing, a small room with institutional furniture and windows that looked out at nothing. Marlowe made it inside, closed the door, and locked it before her legs gave out. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall and stared at her hands. They were shaking, had been shaking since she climbed down from the observation tower. She had killed 6 men with hands that were rock-steady breath control, that was perfect triggers discipline, that would have made her grandfather proud. But now, in the silence of a room where nobody was shooting at her, she couldn't make them stop shaking. Marlowe forced herself to stand. Shower, change into civilian clothes. The motions were mechanical autopilot, carrying her through the basics of existence, while her mind replayed the same 18 minutes over and over. The first target dropping, the machine gunner collapsing, the impossible 800-meter shot with iron sights that should have missed but didn't. 6 men, 6 confirmed kills. She had taken lives today, ended them. 6 people who woke up this morning not knowing it was their last day alive. The thought made her stomach turn. Marlowe made it to the bathroom just in time, throwing up the coffee and nothing else because she hadn't eaten since before the attack. When the retching finally stopped, she sat on the bathroom floor and pressed her forehead against the cool tile. Her grandfather had killed 89 men in Korea, had carried those deaths for the rest of his life, had told her once late at night when the whiskey made him honest that the number didn't matter as much as people thought. 1 or 100, he had said. Once you cross that line, little ghost, you can't uncross it. You just learn to carry the weight. Marlo hadn't understood then. She understood now. Sleep didn't come. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows shift as headlights swept past outside. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the targets falling. Saw them through the scope, through the iron sights, through the spotting scope she had used to confirm each kill. She told herself they were enemy combatants, that they had attacked a military installation, that if she hadn't shot them, they would have killed Blackwell and Finch and Burke and everyone else. All of that was true. It didn't make the weight any lighter. At 0300, Marlo gave up on sleep. She sat at the small desk and pulled out her phone. Typed Lieutenant Wade Holloway into the search bar. The obituary came up immediately. The Navy had released a statement, SEAL killed in training accident. The classified details of the attack weren't public, but the basic facts were there. Survived by wife Jennifer and 3 children, ages 8, 6, and 4. There was a photo. Holloway in his dress uniform smiling, looking like he had his whole life ahead of him. Marlo stared at it until the screen went dark. She had saved 11 lives today. That's what Morrison had said during the debriefing. 6 enemy kills had prevented the death or injury of approximately 11 friendly personnel. But one friendly was already dead. One husband and father who had shown her pictures of his kids just yesterday, who had talked about retirement and getting out before his luck ran out. His luck had run out. And Marlo had been 40 feet above him, focused on her shooting, while he bled out on the concrete below. She opened her notes app, started typing. Mrs. Holloway, you don't know me. My name is Marlo Kincaid. I was at Coronado when your husband died. She deleted it. The words looked wrong, felt inadequate. Started again. Mrs. Holloway, I'm sorry I couldn't save him. Deleted again. There were no words that would make this better. No explanation that would bring Holloway back to his kids. Marlo put the phone down and pressed her palms against her eyes. The shaking wouldn't stop. The sun came up eventually. Marlo showered again, dressed in the same clothes, and reported for the second day of debriefing. She answered the same questions in the same gray room and tried not to think about the fact that somewhere in Virginia Beach, 3 kids were waking up in a house where their father would never come home. 1 week later, Marlo stood in a Pentagon briefing room facing a panel of 6 senior officers. The room was larger than the debriefing space at Coronado, but just as austere. The officers sat behind an elevated desk, looking down at her like judges at a trial. Admiral James Rutherford occupied the center seat. He was in his early 60s with silver hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent decades in the teams before moving to command. His eyes were sharp and assessing. Ms. Kincaid, Rutherford said, we've reviewed the after-action reports from the Coronado incident. We've also reviewed your personnel file and application history. Before we proceed, is there anything you'd like to add to the official record? Marlo stood at attention. The sleepless nights showed in the shadows under her eyes, but her voice was steady. No, sir. Then let's address the primary question. Rutherford looked at the other officers. How did someone with Ms. Kincaid's demonstrated capabilities spend 2 years in a maintenance position? The questions came in waves: her training history, her application record, the 7 rejections, the technical memos she had written anonymously for 2 years. And then Captain Elizabeth Vance walked into the room. She was 42 years old, trim and professional, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She moved with the controlled precision of someone who had spent years proving herself in environments that didn't want her there. Her uniform was immaculate. Her expression was carefully neutral. She didn't look at Marlo. Rutherford gestured to an empty chair. Captain Vance, thank you for joining us. We're reviewing Ms. Kincaid's application history. You rejected her 7 times. Can you explain your reasoning? The conversation that followed was painful and necessary. Vance's justifications, Rutherford's pointed questions. The revelation that in 4 years, Vance had rejected 47 female applicants. 0 had been accepted. The math was damning. Captain Vance, Rutherford said finally, I've reviewed your own application file from 2009. Your test scores were comparable to Ms. Kincaid's. You were rejected 3 times. Do you believe those rejections were justified? The silence stretched. Marlo watched Vance struggle with the question, saw the conflict playing out behind her carefully maintained professional mask. No, sir, Vance said quietly. I don't believe they were justified. And yet you applied those same unjustified standards to 47 other candidates. Sir, I was trying to protect them from From the same institutional bias you faced by becoming that bias, Rutherford's voice was hard. Captain, I understand the impulse, but what you actually did was perpetuate the very system that hurt you. Vance's hands tightened on the table. Yes, sir. Rutherford looked at Marlowe. Ms. Kincaid, Captain Vance's actions directly impacted your career. Do you have anything you'd like to say? Marlowe looked at Vance. Saw a woman who had been broken by a system and had tried to survive by becoming part of it. Saw someone who had made terrible choices for complicated reasons. Saw someone who could be an ally instead of an obstacle. Sir, I'd like to request a private conversation with Captain Vance. The room cleared. Marlowe and Vance sat across from each other in silence. You should hate me, Vance said finally. I did, for a while. Marlowe's voice was tired. But hating you doesn't change anything. It doesn't give me back 2 years. It doesn't fix the system. So what do you want? I want you to help me change it. Vance looked up, surprise breaking through her professional mask. Why would you trust me to do that? Because you know what it costs to be shut out, and because I think you're tired of carrying that weight alone. The conversation that followed was honest in ways that official debriefings could never be. Vance's fear. Her internalized belief that women would fail and prove the critics right. Her decision to become the gatekeeper to prevent that public failure. I told myself I was protecting them, Vance said. But the truth is I was just protecting myself. If they failed, it would prove the board was right about me, and I couldn't live with that. The board was wrong about you. Was it I never made it through the program? You never got the chance. There's a difference. Marlowe paused. Help me make sure the next 47 women get that chance. When the panel reconvened, Vance stood alongside Marlowe. Admiral, Vance said, I'd like to formally recommend that Misty Kincaid be offered a commission and immediate placement in the Advanced Sniper Program. Furthermore, I'd like to propose a comprehensive review of candidate selection procedures. Rutherford studied them both. Ms. Kincaid, the Navy is prepared to offer you a commission as a lieutenant junior grade. Are you interested? Marlowe had known this moment was coming, had thought about it during the sleepless nights and the endless debriefings. The answer should have been simple, but nothing was simple anymore. Sir, I have conditions. The boldness of the statement surprised even her. But she had earned the right to set terms. 6 confirmed kills and 1 dead teammate had bought her that much. First, Marlowe said, I want the candidate selection review to happen before my commission, not after. I won't accept a position if the system that rejected me is still in place to reject others. Second, I want Captain Vance involved in the review process. Throwing her away to make this politically clean would be a waste. Commander Hayes looked shocked. Ms. Kincaid, defending the officer who blocked your career doesn't serve your interests. It serves the interests of the next woman who applies, ma'am. That's what matters. Blackwell, who had been sitting quietly to the side, spoke up. Admiral Ms. Kincaid has earned the right to set terms. She saved my team. If she walks because we won't meet these conditions, we're the ones who lose. Rutherford considered this. Finally, he nodded. All right, we'll do this your way. But Ms. Kincaid, understand this. You're going to be under a microscope. Can you handle that? Marlowe thought about her grandfather, about 14 years of training in secret, about 2 years of being invisible, about 6 men she had killed and 1 she hadn't been able to save. Yes, sir, I can handle it. The funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery on a cold morning in November. Marlowe stood in the back, out of place in her new uniform that still felt like it belonged to someone else. She watched the honor guard fold the flag with mechanical precision, each movement practiced and perfect. Jennifer Holloway sat in the front row with 3 small children. The 8-year-old boy was trying not to cry, his jaw set in a way that reminded Marlowe painfully of his father. The 6-year-old girl held her mother's hand with white-knuckled intensity. The 4-year-old kept asking in a loud whisper when Daddy would wake up. The ceremony was brief. Military funerals always were. Efficient, professional, designed to honor the fallen without dwelling on the hole their absence left behind. But Marlowe could see the hole. Could see it in Jennifer Holloway's hollow eyes and the way the 8-year-old's shoulders shook when the rifles fired their salute. She waited until most of the mourners had left, until the cemetery workers were beginning to fill in the grave. Then she approached Jennifer with her heart hammering against her ribs. Ma'am, Marlowe said quietly, I'm Lieutenant Kincaid. I was at Coronado when it happened. Jennifer Holloway looked at her with red-rimmed eyes that had cried themselves dry. You're the one who killed the attackers. Yes, ma'am. Wade mentioned you once, said there was a woman on base who knew more about shooting than half the team, but nobody would listen to her. Jennifer's voice was hollow, scraped raw. He thought that was bullshit. Marlo didn't know what to say. There were no right words for this. Did he suffer? Jennifer asked. The official report said he bled out from shrapnel wounds. But I need to know the truth. Did he suffer? The truth would hurt. The lie would hurt worse. Marlo had learned that much in the past 2 weeks. Yes, ma'am, she said quietly. He was conscious for several minutes. The medics did everything they could, but the wounds were too severe. I'm sorry. Jennifer closed her eyes, a single tear tracked down her cheek. Thank you for being honest. Everyone else has been trying to make it sound peaceful, like he just went to sleep. But Wade deserved better than comfortable lies. Ma'am, your husband maintained his position during the attack. His covering fire allowed the team to reach better cover. If he hadn't done that, the casualties would have been much higher. He always said his job was to make sure his guys came home. Jennifer's voice cracked. I just wish someone had made sure he came home too. Yeah. The words hit Marlo like a physical blow. She had saved 11 lives, but she hadn't saved the one that mattered most to the woman standing in front of her. Jennifer reached into her purse and pulled out a small brass compass, battered and worn from years of hard use. He carried this on every deployment, Jennifer said. Told the kids it always brought him home safe. I want you to have it. Ma'am, I can't. Yes, you can. You're training snipers now, right? Teaching them. I will be, ma'am. Then teach them to come home. Teach them to be so damn good that they don't have to be heroes, that they can just do their job and come home to their families. Jennifer pressed the compass into Marlo's hand. Her grip was fierce. That's what Wade would have wanted. That's the only thing that makes any of this mean something. Marlo looked down at the compass. The brass was warm from Jennifer's hands. The needle pointed north, steady and true despite everything. I promise, ma'am, Marlo said. I'll make sure they come home. She carried that promise with her through the next 6 months. Through the completion of her own training, where every evaluation felt like a test designed to prove she didn't belong. Through the development of new curriculum that challenged decades of established doctrine. Through the late nights when the shaking wouldn't stop and the faces of 6 dead men haunted what little sleep she could find. The compass sat on her desk while she worked. A reminder that every student she would train was someone's husband or wife, son or daughter. That excellence wasn't about glory or validation or proving the critics wrong. It was about making sure they came home. 6 months later, Marlo stood at the front of a classroom at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility. The room was filled with 20 students, 18 men and 2 women, all of them selected for the Advanced Sniper Program under the new blind evaluation protocols that Vance had helped implement. She wore the silver bar of a lieutenant junior grade on her collar. The uniform still felt strange, but less so than it had at Holloway's funeral. She was growing into it, learning to carry the weight of the rank and the responsibility it represented. The rifle in her hands felt exactly right. Good morning, she said. I'm Lieutenant Kincaid. Over the next 12 weeks, I'm going to teach you precision marksmanship. Not the way it's always been taught, but the way it should be taught. She moved to the whiteboard and began writing. Ballistic formulas, wind-reading techniques, the mathematics of distance and gravity and atmospheric conditions that most shooters treated as black magic, but was really just applied physics. Most of you have been told that the sniper training is about natural talent, Marlo continued, that some people have the gift and others don't. That's bullshit. What separates a good shooter from a great one isn't talent. It's understanding. And I'm going to teach you to understand every variable that affects your shot. Because when you understand, you control. And when you control, you survive. And survival means you get to go home. In the back row, Private Emma Thorne sat with a notebook open in absolute focus on her face. Thorne was 19 years old, barely qualified for the program, and trying to prove she belonged. The old selection board would have rejected her. The new board had seen her potential. At the range that afternoon, Marlo worked with the students individually. She corrected stances, adjusted breathing techniques, watched them struggle with concepts that would eventually click into place through repetition and understanding. When she reached Thorne, the young private was shaking. First-day nerves combined with the pressure of being one of only 2 women in a class where every eye was watching to see if she would fail. You're overthinking it, Marlo said. Ma'am, I can't get the sight picture right. The reticle won't settle. That's because you're trying to force it to be still. Your body moves, your heart beats. The reticle is going to move with it. You don't fight that movement. You work with it. Marlo demonstrated the technique her grandfather had taught her 14 years ago on a Montana ridge, showed Thorne how to find the rhythm of her own heartbeat, how to fire in the space between the pulses where the body went momentarily still. Thorne tried again. The shot was better. Not perfect, but better. Good, Marlowe said. Now do it again. And again. Until your body learns the rhythm without your brain having to think about it. By the end of the day, Thorne had made progress. Small, incremental improvement that would build over weeks and months into genuine competence. As the students were leaving, someone called out from the doorway. Lieutenant Kincaid. Marlowe turned. Garrett Finch stood there, his arms still in a sling from the shoulder wound, but his eyes clear and determined. Finch, what are you doing here? Requesting permission to join your course, ma'am. Marlowe studied him. You're still recovering. Medical cleared me for light duty, and I need this. Finch stepped forward. Ma'am, I've been a sniper for 18 years. Thought I knew everything there was to know. But watching you work reading the technical memos you wrote, I realized I've been doing it wrong. Or at least not as right as it could be. You're a damn good shooter, Finch. I'm a good shooter who's losing his edge. My eyes aren't what they were. I need to adapt, or I need to retire. He met her eyes. I'd rather adapt, if you'll teach me. Marlowe felt something shift. Finch had advocated for her when it mattered, had convinced Blackwell to let her take the shot that saved the team, had seen her when others hadn't. You're in, she said. Class starts at 0600 tomorrow. Don't be late. Wouldn't dream of it, ma'am. 3 months into the program, the students took their final evaluation. A 1,000-yard shot in variable wind conditions with moving targets. The kind of test that separated those who understood the science from those who were just good at pulling triggers. Marlowe watched from the observation tower, the same tower where she had made 6 kills with hands that wouldn't stop shaking afterward. The shaking had gotten better, not gone, but manageable. She had learned to live with it the way her grandfather had lived with his own ghosts. Private Thorne was up. The young woman who had barely qualified, who had shaken so badly on day one that she couldn't hold the reticle steady. Marlowe watched her work through the problem, saw her check the wind, calculate the lead for the moving target control, her breathing the way she had been taught. Saw her fire. 920 meters downrange, the target fell. First shot hit. Marlowe felt her grandfather's presence like a hand on her shoulder. This was what he had been training her for. Not just to shoot, but to teach. To pass on the knowledge to someone who would pass it on again. The legacy wasn't the 6 men she had killed at Coronado. It was the students she would train. The ones who would learn to be so good that they could do their job and come home to their families. That evening, Marlowe drove to the small house she had rented outside San Diego. Inside on her desk was the notebook she had kept for 2 years at Coronado. 2 years of observations and technical notes and ideas that no one had asked for. The notebook had been published as an official training manual. The Kincaid Method: Precision Marksmanship for Modern Warfare. Her name, her grandfather's legacy, her promise to Jennifer Holloway made real. Next to the manual sat Wade Holloway's compass pointing north. Marlowe picked it up. The brass was cool now, the warmth of Jennifer's hands long faded, but the needle still pointed true. She opened her laptop and began working on lesson plans for the next training cycle. The work never stopped. Her grandfather had taught her that. The mission was never complete. You just did your job, trained the next generation, and hoped they learned enough to survive. Before she closed the laptop for the night, Marlowe opened a new document, started typing. Grandpa, I kicked the door down, just like you said I would. The program is changing. We're training 20 students this cycle, 2 of them women. Next cycle will be bigger. The selection protocols are blind now. No names, no photos, just capabilities. Vance helped make that happen. The woman who rejected me 7 times is now the one making sure no one else gets rejected for the wrong reasons. I'm teaching the way you taught me. Patience, precision, understanding the science behind the art. Some of the students struggle, but they're learning, and the ones who complete the program will be better than the generation before them. I wish you could see this. Wish you could meet Thorne and Finch and the others. Wish you could tell me if I'm doing it right. But I think I know what you'd say. You'd say, stop wishing and get back to work. I killed 6 men at Coronado. I think about that every day. About the weight of those deaths and what they cost, and whether I made the right calls. I couldn't save Holloway. That weighs too. His widow gave me his compass and asked me to teach my students to come home. I'm trying, Grandpa. I'm trying to honor that promise. You told me once that carrying the weight was part of the job. That once you cross the line, you can't uncross it. You were right. I can't take back those shots. Can't bring back the 6 men I killed or the one I couldn't save. But I can make sure the next generation is ready. That they're so well trained that they can do the impossible and still come home. That's the legacy, isn't it? Not the kills, not the medals or the recognition. It's the knowledge passed down. The students who survive because someone taught them right. Thank you for teaching me right. Love your little ghost. She saved the letter but didn't send it anywhere. There was no one to send it to. It was just words on a screen, a conversation with a dead man who had given her everything and asked for nothing except that she be ready when the moment came. She had been ready, and the cost of being ready was something she would carry for the rest of her life. Marlo closed the laptop, checked the compass one more time. North, always north. The direction home. Tomorrow she would teach. Would train the next generation of warriors to shoot straight and think clearly and survive the impossible. Tonight she would sit with the weight of 6 kills and 1 failure, and the knowledge that she had earned her place through blood and skill and patience measured in years. The ghost was invisible no more, and the door she had kicked down would stay open for everyone who came after. That was enough. That was everything.